Welcome everyone, I'm Dale and this is Cinema Historia. A runaway wife, a maiden voyage, and an iceberg dead ahead. This week we're going back to 1953 for a drama film called Titanic, starring Clifton Webb, Barbara Stanwyck, Robert Wagner, Audrey Dalton, and Brian Aherne. And this is directed by John Negulesco. So where does our story begin this week? Well, it begins with Richard Sturgis, played by Clifton Webb. At the last minute, Richard Sturgis, a wealthy expatriate in Europe, offers an immigrant money for his steerage class ticket, which was the lowest class, and succeeds. The ticket is for the maiden voyage of the RMS Titanic. Once aboard, he seeks out his runaway wife, Julia, played by Barbara Stanwyck. He discovers she is trying to take away their two unsuspecting children, 18-year-old Annette, played by Audrey Dalton, and 10-year-old son Norman, played by Harper Carter, to her hometown of Mackinac Island in Michigan. She wants to raise them as down-to-earth Americans rather than someone ruthless like Richard himself. As the ship is prepared for departure, the company representative suggests to Captain Edward J. Smith, played by Brian Aherne, that a record-setting speedy passage would be welcomed. Other passengers include Margaret Molly Brown, played by Thelma Ritter, a 20-year-old Purdue University tennis player, Gifford Rogers, played by Robert Wagner, and George S. Healy, played by Richard Basehart, a Catholic priest who has been defrocked for alcoholism. When Annette learns of Julia's intentions, she insists on returning to Europe with Richard on the next ship as soon as they reach America. Julia says that Annette is old enough to make her own decisions, but insists on custody of Norman. An angered Richard forces Julia to reveal that Norman is not his son, but rather the result of a one-night stand. Upon hearing this, he agrees to give up all claim to Norman. Meantime, Second Officer Charles Lightoller expresses his concern to Captain Smith about the ship's speed when they receive two messages from other ships warning of iceberg sightings near their route. However, Smith assures him there is no danger. So, when danger does strike, does Richard and Julia reconcile their differences? Does Annette fall in love with a 20-year-old tennis player? Does Norman prove to be as heroic as a legitimate son? And does a defrocked Catholic priest prove his worth? This is actually a great movie. It was the first Titanic film for 20th Century Fox, which also released the 1997 film of the same title internationally, while Paramount Pictures handled the North American distribution. Some of the original survivors of the RMS Titanic were invited to the tear-filled special screening of the film in New York. To ensure authenticity, the producers recruited a former captain of the Queen Elizabeth as the technical consultant. In fact, one real-life survivor who was invited found the film so realistic, she refused to believe it was a Hollywood recreation. The film had 3 nominations and won an Oscar for Best Writing, Story, and Screenplay at the 1954 Academy Awards. And the trivia question this week: were several of the sets reused for another 1953 film? Were several of the sets reused for another 1953 film? So, a little more history and the answer to our trivia question coming up next. This week for history, I thought it might be interesting to talk about the Kodak Brownie camera and how it pertains to our Titanic story. So the Brownie was a series of cameras made by Eastman Kodak. Released in 1900, it introduced the snapshot to the masses. It was a basic cardboard box camera with a simple convex concave lens that took 2¼ inch square pictures. Because of its simple controls and initial price of $1, which is the equivalent to about $33 today, along with the low price of Kodak roll film and processing, the Brownie camera surpassed its marketing goal. It was invented by Frank A. Brunel for the Eastman Kodak Company. Over 150,000 Brownie cameras were shipped in the first year of production. An improved model called No. 2 Brownie came out in 1901, which produced larger 3¼ by 2¼ inch photos and cost $2, and was also a huge success. Brownies were extensively marketed to children, with Kodak using them to popularize photography. They were also taken to war by soldiers, so many iconic shots were actually taken on Brownies. Hence, we get to how this camera pertains to the Titanic. So, Canadian Bernice Palmer, or nicknamed Bernie, received a Kodak Brownie box camera either for Christmas in 1911 or for her birthday on January 10th, 1912. In early April, Bernie and her mother boarded the Cunard liner Carpathia in New York for a Mediterranean cruise. Carpathia had just cleared New York when it received a distress call from the White Star liner Titanic on April 14th. It raced to the scene of the sinking and managed to rescue over 700 survivors from the icy North Atlantic. With her new camera, Bernice took pictures of the iceberg that sliced open the Titanic's hull and snapshots of some of the Titanic survivors. Lacking enough food to feed both the paying passengers and the survivors, the Carpathia turned around and headed back to New York to land the survivors. An unnamed newsman for Underwood and Underwood, a New York photography agency, scored one of the most valuable scoops when he met Bernice Palmer on board the Carpathia. The newsman offered to develop, print, and return the pictures to Bernie along with $10. Not realizing the extraordinary value of her photos, she readily agreed. And feeling that they had been exploited, Bernice and her father would later take action to get the images returned. I'm glad they did, because in 1986, Bernie gave her camera, Titanic photos, and other association materials to the Smithsonian. And Bernice Palmer passed away in Los Angeles on February 11th, 1989, at the age of 96. Pretty interesting. And I have some interesting cameras on my shelf. These are a few Brownie models from the late 40s, early 50s, Hawkeye and Duaflex models. And the one on my far left with the flash is called the Brownie Holiday Flash Camera. And I put it on the shelf because it came out in 1953, the same year as our film. Came out from 1953 to 1962. And the answer to our trivia question this week were several of the sets reused for another 1953 film. Yes, interestingly enough, the ship model, which was 20 feet long, was remodified. The dining room walls, the lounge, the promenade deck, and the deck chairs were used again for the 1953 film Gentlemen Prefer Blondes with Marilyn Monroe. Pretty neat. I hope you enjoy my videos. I hope you enjoy watching them as much as I enjoy making them for you. And if you do enjoy them that much, can you please hit the subscribe button to help me along the way? This is Dale for CinemaHistoria, and this has been Remembering Titanic. Thanks for watching, everyone.